I'm going to be talking about bar velocity, using a different approach when using bar velocity tracking, and it's how we do it in the Bondarchuk system. So that's what the whole presentation is going to be about. The first part of it is getting everyone kind of up to speed on the Bondarchuk system, so you understand what we're talking about. I would encourage you, if you're not familiar with it, to have an open mind because it's a little bit different than your traditional methodology. I'm going to go through that and why that is, and compare the differences. Okay, so why don't I just get going here? And I'm hoping to be able to get all this in within an hour. I think if you have questions, probably best we do it at the end. So make notes of the questions. And if I get on a roll here, I'm sure we'll have time for questions. And even if we don't within an hour, I don't mind sticking around and and answering questions. There's always a lot of questions when I present on the Bondarchuk system, so I would encourage it. Okay. All right. The other thing too is Kelly will send out, or she'll send everybody a code to, if you're interested in learning more about it, taking the course. We have a code. It's output 15, capital O. It'll get you 15% off the price of the course, and she'll send you a link and all that to it. Okay, it's not hard to find online. So, all right, okay, all right. So I'm going to share my screen here. How are we looking there, Kelly? We good?
All good, Derek. We can see it. That's perfect.
All right. So this is my beautiful fancy title page. I've been using bar velocity tracking. I'm going to go through how I got into it, so I won't talk much about that now. I've been using it for the last 12 years or so. It's kind of interesting how I got involved in it, why I got involved in it. I'm typically not a gimmick guy. Like I'm no, you know, I will use technology where it works and where it's easy to use and where I can get a direct application to what I'm doing. Other than that, I wouldn't call myself old school, but I've just, I'm usually quite busy, have a lot of athletes, a lot going on. And anytime that, like for technology, for me to be implemented in what I do, it has to be easy. It has to be, I can't be screwing around with it in workout. And that's the one thing I like about the output, and is that it's super simple. I just started using it over the last few months. One thing I won't go on too much about it, but one thing I do really like about it is the interface is so user friendly compared to some of the other ones that I've used before. So it just, like I said, for me, technology's got to be super simple, otherwise I won't use it. All right. So the purpose of this is going to be, I'm just going to offer you a different strategy and perspective on how I use bar velocity or any kind of velocity in training, to be honest with you. So, I mean, everything I talk about with bar velocity here, you could apply to anything that you can measure. And we'll talk about that as we get further into this. But to understand what I'm going to talk about, if I got right into the bar velocity thing, you'd probably have a hard time getting a grip on it, because you have to understand how the Bondarchuk system works, first of all. And there is a lot of there's a lot of misinformation out there regarding the Bondarchuk system. So I'll do my best to set it straight here. The reason I did the course actually was because I brought Dr. B over when I was coaching in Canada. We brought him over to our club in a small town in the mountains of British Columbia. It's a long story how that came about. He ended up moving in my basement. Him and I started writing a book together. That's primarily how I learned about the methodology, the theory and methodology of it. I've been working with it ever since. I've used it on jumpers, sprinters, throwers. You can use it for any sport, any physical activity, once you understand how the principles work. Okay, so that's the next 20, 30 minutes is going to be all about that. Okay. All right. So this is Dr. B. This is back in Kamloops a few years ago. It's me on the left and former athlete of mine, Dylan Armstrong, on the right. Can't say enough about Dr. B. He really is changed my views on Russians. Well, he's actually Ukrainian now. I guess we have to make that distinction. I think that's important. He's a super kind, warm-hearted guy. Just a beautiful human being, and he is truly a genius. Like, he really, the way he, I think you'll get that. I think you'll get that impression as I go through how the system works. It's really quite unique. It's very special, and it's very, very effective. But he's a great guy. And the guy on the right in that picture is a former athlete of mine, Dylan Armstrong. I coached him from the age of 14 up to 20, almost 25, I think he was, or maybe he just turned 25 when Dr. B came, which was 2005. I turned everything. He had started throwing shot a few years before that. He was #1 in the world as a hammer thrower as a junior. Dropped the hammer a few years into senior, picked up the shot with me through almost 20 meters, and then Dr. B arrived, and from there went on to throw. Still holds Canadian record at 22 meters and change. I think he has 5 world championships medals under his belt and 1 Olympic bronze. Okay. But the more interesting thing about this, as it applies here, is Dylan is now a coach. You know, he's retired, he's coaching now. And the guy on the right there, his name is Ethan Katzberg. And Ethan Katzberg has kind of turned the throwing world upside down lately by being Dylan's coaching him. He's been throwing. I think he's been seriously throwing for only like 4 years. He won the world championships this year in the hammer throw, beating all the top throwers in the world. Obviously, it's world championships. And he sort of came out of nowhere. Huge amount of growth in a very short period of time. And Dylan's been coaching him, and I've been just, I really wasn't following what was going on with Dylan and this guy until he won world championships this year. And then I started so now I started paying more attention. So now I've been talking to Dylan a lot about his training, and that'll come in and out as we go through this presentation. But I can't say enough about the job that Dylan has done with this kid and his job as a coach. It's just really quite remarkable. He really does get how to do this system. And I can't say that about too many people. I got a lot of people come my way, come across my path that claim that they know how to do the system. And I don't mean to be negative about it, but almost inevitably with most people, other than a handful of friends and guys I know that do it regularly, a lot of people, they just, without really getting in depth to it, it's very hard to sort of figure it all out. But anyways, I'm going to give you a synopsis of it here as we move forward. So, okay, so here we go. So this is a different system. Okay. And when we compare it to traditional training methodology, there's, I just think it's important to sort of put the two side by side and go through this so you can really get a clear picture of how it's different. With a traditional training methodology, you want to go, we all want the same thing, is to take an athlete that's not in sport form and put them into sport form. Okay. Whatever that means, whatever sport it is, however you do it. Traditional training methodology, that's the goal. However, in a traditional training methodology, it is all revolved around a calendar. So what typically, and I'm going to make a lot of generalizations here. It may not apply to every system and methodology out there, but generally speaking, I think it does. in most traditional methodologies, you have a start date and you have an end date. And those dates are predetermined. So we look at when you want to peak and you say, okay, that's going to be the summertime or August or something like that. In our sport, that's typically when it is a world champs or some kind of, or Olympic games, some kind of championships. Then we go back, we look at, we'll have a traditional start date for training, and we'll take that calendar and we'll divide it up. And typically that, depending on how modern your thinking is, you'll get anywhere from 1 to 3 peaks in that. Okay. But all of that is predetermined. And the goal is to fit the athlete and their training into the calendar. Okay. And typically, it involves some kind of cycling. Okay. And it could be, when we're talking about theory and methodology, typically, and the grand scheme of things, systems and that, typically we're talking about macrocycles or annual plans, okay? Or mesocycles, but macrocycles, mesocycles, depending on the literature, they kind of mean the same thing. It's a large group of microcycles, okay? Typically an annual plan or a year is made up of a number of these cycles. And so as I'm talking about this today, generally speaking, when I refer to cycle, I'm talking about that type of cycle, a shorter, not an annual cycle, but a collection of microcycles. Okay. However, whatever that means in your system of training. And so in a traditional methodology, typically these cycles, whatever it is they use, they're not typically driven by exercise selection, although with more enlightened practitioners, exercise choice and exercise or program design in terms of exercise is super, super important. It's become more of a big deal these days in terms of, choosing specific exercises and where general and special exercises fit into the whole thing. But the point here that I want to make is that the methodology itself is not driven by exercise selection. It's driven, when we're trying to create sport form, it's driven by the wave loading or the manipulation of volume and intensity. Okay. So typically what it is the exercises will sort of, everyone has their traditional exercises and their go-to exercises, and we do as well, but how we cycle them in and out is a bit of a different approach. But really where the changes come in typical training methodology is in volume and intensity. And again, more enlightened coaches that are doing a more modern type of training, those waves, the peaks and the waves tend to be smaller, but they're still there. And this is really what separates the Bondarchuk system from a traditional methodology. And when you use a classic training methodology, the idea is that by manipulating volume and intensity, you are trying to achieve some kind of growth within the cycle. And that usually involves some kind of tapering because you're overloading the athlete. And as you come in order to peak them, you start to back off on the amount of volume and or intensity, which is load. Okay. In the Bondarchuk system, we want to achieve sport form like everybody else at the end of our cycle. We're trying to get growth in the cycle. However, we base it not upon the calendar per se, but we base it upon an individual's reaction to training. And to do that, we do not wave load volume and intensity like you do in a traditional program. The volume and intensity, or the load that we have, is flatlined. Okay. So essentially, basically what that means is that when what you see at the beginning of a cycle, say if this is we call them PDSFs, a period of development of sport form. It's a long collection of macrocycles. I can't tell you how long that would be because like I just said, is different for everybody because we base it upon the athlete's reaction. But when you walk into the weight room or the training area or the throwing area at the beginning of the cycle, you'll see an athlete performing a workout. You come back, say, I don't know, 6 weeks later, they're doing the same thing. Nothing changes. All right. The workout stays precisely the same. Okay. And I needed to come up with a better term than not wave loading volume and intensity, which is the way I've been saying it for 10 or 12 years. And I came up with this just phrase, steady state loading. Okay. So there's no change in the application of loads. And when you do it this way, as I think you'll come to see through the rest of this presentation, that gives you a far more individualized adaptation. Rather than trying to achieve what we call a forced adaptation, as we do in a classic methodology, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying that's not what we do. This is a more individualized adaptation. Okay, we maintain volume and intensity, and we let the athlete adapt to the stimulus purely. Now, how does that work? Okay. Well, we start off, again, here's our cycle. It's expanded so that you can see this a little easier. We start out with a workout or a session or program. And when you hear me say workout, session, program, those terms are synonymous, okay? They're not different. And I will just, without thinking, I'll use different terms throughout the presentation on that. But whenever I say a workout, session, or program, I'm meaning the same thing. And what I mean by that is that is a unit of training that is done in a single, when the athlete shows up to work out, they're doing this unit of training, and that's what it is. Okay. Now, within the Bondarchuk system, if you've read any of the books, particularly the books on periodization, those are the blue and green colored ones. There are a number of different methods within his system that we can use. And this is where you got to be careful if you are from another sport and you're learning the Bondarchuk system through someone who's using it who is only a throws coach. Because in the throws, we only really use one or two of these methods, but there's all kinds of them. In the first book he had, there were 16 different methods. Okay. And these methods, there's a block method, a stage method, there's a complex variation, there's a complex. We mainly use the complex, which means we don't change anything within the cycle, okay? In other methods, there will be change within the cycle, but that change is very, very strictly controlled. And within the stage or the block, there is no change within it, okay? But I don't want to get too deep into that because we could talk about that for quite a while. But I go through it extensively in the course. The course has 64 different videos on how to manage all of this, and it's quite in depth. Okay, but really, in your sport, you'll find that one of these methods is going to apply, and it's going to work best for you. Okay, for us, it's the complex method, which means we're doing everything all the time. So if you probably can't see it on your screen, but that workout, that's an actual workout sheet from one of the athletes I'm coaching right now. Her name is Nia Britt. I will show you a lot of her data in this. There's throwing, there's special exercises, there's weightlifting and general exercise, all in that one workout. Okay. It's a very SWAT program. It's very concise and it's low volume, very high intensity. Okay. So we take one of these workouts. This is how we work this. We take it and we look at these training units as a single stimulus. Yes, as we are working with an athlete and we're going through all of we're learning about them and we're trying out these different programs, different units of training. We are trying to see what is going to work, which particular exercises and which combinations of exercises are going to give us the biggest bang for our buck, which I'll get into in a moment. But we look at that unit as a single training stimulus. And when we start a cycle, and in particular, when we first start working with an athlete, So the first time I worked with Nia, I wrote her a program that looked something like that. I based it all on, my experience and what I've done with other female hammer throwers. And we take that and we apply it. Okay. They do it, but then we just keep doing it over and over and over and over and over again. Okay. That program does not change from day to day. Like I said, you come back 50 sessions later, it takes Nia about around 48 to 52 sessions for her to peak, or at least that's what we've discovered so far. You come back at number 50, and it's the exact same workout. The only thing that's different, if we've done our job properly, is everything's better. Results are better. Okay. Now, so we just roll it over. Now, you can't do that in every sport because you can't do the specific activity every single day or even twice a day. Nia right now is training twice a day. So she may be doing the same program twice a day. 10 times in 10 times a week. In heavy throws, you can do that. In some sports, you can't. But all that means is that you're going to have more programs. Instead of one program that you're repeating over and over and over again, you might have two that you alternate 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. You might have 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. The advantage to having more programs is it tends to stimulate more growth. But the advantage to having a single program is that you peak faster. And so you have to, the interplay of those two realities, you have to manage as a coach. For me, I prefer, and Dylan says this quite a bit, and I think it's quite an astute observation, is that one of the reasons why you don't want too many programs is because if you screw them up, you won't know until you get to the end of it. And if the athlete hasn't grown, well, then if you have 3 programs, it's going to take you 3 times the number of sessions to peak. And that could be months and months. And if it didn't work, well, then you haven't wasted all that time, but it could have been better. Let's put it that way. Okay. Sometimes it is a waste. So I like to stick to as few programs as possible. And then the athlete will come into peak faster. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. So all of this, if we've done it right, they will achieve what we call peak condition. And we'll get into how we determine that and the measurables in a moment. But if we do it right, they will peak. So I can't see the right side of my screen here, but I think, let's just say for argument's sake, you should see a red 33 in the upper right-hand corner. So let's, for argument's sake, in this example, say it took 33 sessions for the athlete to peak of the one program. If there was 2 programs, that would be 66 total sessions. Okay, you see how that works? All right, so let's say for argument's sake, it's one program, 33 sessions before they peak. We don't have a taper. Okay, that's another beauty about this system, is you don't have the unpredictability of a taper, because one of the problems with tapering is that trying to, unless you have a lot of experience doing it, trying to just simply unload, sometimes if you don't time it right, the athlete, you unload too much, right? Especially with women, it's tricky because generally speaking, women need a bit more volume than men do. And I found with a lot of women I've coached, particularly like some women I've coached react more like men, but in that, you don't want to, you could taper them back when I didn't do the Bondarchuk system, but most women, generally speaking, if you ease off the volume too much, then they may have an initial climb, but then they'll crash pretty quick. Okay. So we don't taper in this. And so that's one of the interesting things about hearing the stories of Ethan Katzberg and Dylan is, they're at World Champs this year, and the 3 days before, they're busting their ass, because they're in peak condition, and they're at the tail end of this. And one thing about Katzberg that's super interesting is he peaks super, super fast. It's like, I forget what, I think Dylan told me it's 16 or 17 sessions, which is a massive advantage if you can do that, because he can peak like, I think Dylan told me he peaks on like 22 times a year, which is nuts. Okay. if you can do that, that's a big advantage. And you know, Dylan, the term he used for that, I think him and Dr. B talk about having a talent for development, and I think that's what he's referring to there. So anyway, but when they're in peak condition, we haven't tapered them, so they've adapted to the stimulus, they've adapted to the volume. There's no reason to take them off the volume and intensity, because if you do that, they're gonna go down, right? So how that plays out and looks in real life on a, you know, at a training venue at a world championship is pretty interesting, because everybody's like, what the hell are you? I got a couple of interesting stories about my own experience with that, which I won't get into. I talk about it in the course, where I made mistakes because I got nervous and I backed off using the Bondarchuk system. Athlete paid for it, and then later on, I learned no, because you got to keep going right through, and that's when we were successful. So, okay, so there's no taper. Athlete peaks in condition. They're doing the same thing. 33 in our example, 33 sessions. So how do we peak them then? How do we time it? What's the periodization like? It's really quite simple. You find out when you want them to peak. Okay, so let's say it's a date. You need to peak here. And then what you do is you just line that up with your calendar. Okay, and this is this is the screenshot from one of Nia's actual calendars leading into it. It wasn't nationals, but it was another meet where she did quite well. And you line it up where you want them to peak. You want that session to be your 33rd, or, you know, close to it. And you simply count back 33 sessions according to whatever your typical periodization. And I've used all kinds of different micro setups: 2+1, 3+1, 3+1, 2+1, 5+1, whatever works for you. You fit that in to the calendar, and you get your start date, which is, in this example, I think it looks like it's about 7 weeks before, which is about what it takes for Nia in that. And I'll show you another example in a bit. Okay, that's about what it takes. Katzberg, if he's doing one program and he's doing it, you know, and he peaks in 16 or 17 sessions, well, if he's doing them 6 a week, that's not even 3 weeks. It's not even a month that he peaks in. Okay, if you are a sprinter and you can't do full out sprinting twice a day every day, and so maybe you have 2 or 3 programs that are all different in nature. One sprints, one might be easy running, one might be whatever. Then that's going to be, if you peak in 33 specific sessions, but you have 3 different sessions and you're going to roll them over 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Well, that's going to be 99 sessions. Okay, so it's you know, whatever that's going to, then you may fit them in twice a day, whatever that's going to work out to. You would count it out. It's probably going to be about 3 or 4 months before you can peak. Okay, so that's kind of how it works. A lot of people I've heard say, oh, the Bondarchuk system, it's training, you know, it's doing the same thing, you know, it's training 10 times a week. I can't sprint 10 times a week. Well, that's not how it works. You only fit in the specific content according to how you can recover. Okay. All right. And so we want them to, you know, we want the peak to time up with the growth through that last cycle. And we'll talk a bit about transfer in a second here. But what you want to do is when you have an idea, or you have a good idea of what exercises transfer the best, you want to save those for this cycle that's going to be right before they compete, because you know they're going to respond well to it. You're going to get a big growth. Okay. So what we do then, once we got that figured out, we have an idea of how long that cycle is going to be, and the basic periodization, and how long it takes them to reach peak condition, whether it's 1, 2, or 3 sessions, whatever it is. Then what we do is we take that little unit and we look at our calendar, and we just keep repeating that over and over again throughout the season. Now, it's a little more complicated than this. If you are coaching someone like a Katzberg, it's so short. He peaked so short that Dylan, I mean, I don't even know if Dylan's ever used a maintenance cycle, but not everyone can afford to do that. You may reach peak condition and you're going to want to maintain it, and there's a way to do that. And we have it. I go through all that in the course. You may want a rest cycle in there. I used to use a lot of rest cycles between each one of these, but typically now I will. Sometimes I won't, other times. Okay. But the point here is that the more of these cycles that you can get in a given time frame, and in this example, just it's 9 times in a year, you're going to have 9 different peaks. And one thing you have to understand is that every time an athlete comes into peak condition, if you've done your job right and you've picked the right exercises, which we'll get into in a sec, then they should grow. Okay, they should grow more and more. And so the growth rate in this system I have found to be extraordinary, and it's quite amazing. And one of the things, now that Katzberg has done what he's done, everybody's like, how did someone improve that fast? And there's all these accusations and things like that. But I've seen it. I've had the girl I'm talking about, I'm using as an example coming up. She, in the first year I coached her, she improved almost 9 meters at 26 years old. That's almost unheard of. I've had a coach another woman a few years ago, 6 meters in 6 months. I don't make these things public because I'm afraid what I'm going to get accused of, to be honest with you. But the growth rates are that good, or can be that good, if you pick the exercises properly and you time it up right. So if we are not wave loading volume and intensity, then how are we driving adaptation? Well, I've already talked about it to some degree. It's by using exercise selection. So what I said at the beginning of this is, in traditional methodologies, adaptation is primarily driven by the wave loading of volume and intensity, the manipulation of it. Here, we don't do that. We keep it steady, but we use exercise selection or transfer. And Dr. B's written all kinds of books on transfer on this topic, on that topic. And that's how we drive adaptation. So the choice of exercises for each one of these little cycles I just showed you is critical. That means when I say choice of exercise, I'm talking about the weights of hammers, the types of special exercises that we do, the special throwing exercises, whatever you can think of. And there's a whole classification scheme, which ironically, a lot of people think the exercise classification scheme is the Bondarchuk system. It's not. It's just an exercise classification. That's the biggest mistake I've seen, is people implementing the exercise classification scheme within their own methodology and calling it the Bondarchuk system. And in fact, that methodology, or the classification system, is just simply a way to organize the exercises. It's not technically, it's not actually the system, but it is inherent within it. So when we are picking these exercises, I agonize every time over what exercises to pick. And when things don't go well in the middle of a cycle, the first thing I'm thinking about, shit, why did I pick that? But you don't know unless you try. That's the thing. It's all about experimentation. And I cannot tell you how many times. I mean, I only spent 1 year with Dr. B one-on-one. Dylan could give you way more feedback on this. But when I was with him side by side coaching every day, a lot of times he would write a program and I said, well, why did you pick that? Why did you pick that exercise? I'd just be asking out of curiosity. And he'd go, I don't know. I'm just see. I just want to see if it works. He's just throwing it against the wall to see if it sticks. If it doesn't, then he knows not to use that again, or at least that within, and that idea applies also to the combination of exercises. Okay. So this is in some regards, the simplest system you'll ever see once it's implemented, but there's a lot of nuance to it and a lot of hard thinking that goes on. So anyways, when we look at these curves and the athlete starts in a cycle and you see the red curve here. Okay. And we'll get into the actual curves in a moment. I'll show you some examples when we look at that. So how do we determine, how do we get that curve to go up? We pick the right exercises. Okay. We have to, through trial and error and through experience, we choose, again, I'm saying, I'm repeating myself here, but it's very important. If you, the better the exercise choice you have, the bigger the growth in that cycle is going to be. Okay. And that's super important to understand that. Okay. That is the essence of transfer. Okay. Measurables. Okay, so if you've done any reading on the Bondarchuk system, and I read all of Bondarchuk stuff before I ever met the guy, and I had these things, these three, well, if you've ever read anything about it, you know of these three reactions. And I had them all misconstrued, misinterpreted from the readings, because his stuff, when you read the translated into English, can be very difficult. But if you've studied any of his stuff, you know that there are three different reactions. And what these are those red lines of reaction curves are the results in training that we are collecting when we're within a cycle. So you have to have a measurable. Now, in our sport, in heavy throws or in throwing, our gold standard is throwing distance. Okay. In all of the 4 throws in track and field, you can throw and you can measure every single session if you want. Javelin's a little tougher. You can't do it like 10 times a week. I've seen Dr. B try, it doesn't work. But in the heavy throws, you can. If you're, we go lower volume, more often, high intensity. Sometimes workouts are only 12 to 16 throws, but we'll do it twice a day, 10 times a week. Okay. 10 sessions a week. And every day, we just record the best throw of the day. And we're lucky because that gives us the ultimate, the gold standard in measurables, which is the actual competitive event and a perfect result. If you're a soccer player, that's not so easy. Okay. Because how do you measure a soccer player's peak condition every day? Unless you can't have a championship soccer game every single day. And even if you could, how would you single out the one player and all of that, right? But you can come close. Okay. You can come close with the right battery of measurables. Okay. But the first thing you got to do is you have to establish if you're using exercises and measurables that are not totally specific or less specific, you do have to establish, if you can at first, the correlation between the curves you're getting in your exercise, your testing battery, and the actual peak condition of the athlete. And there's ways to do it. And some of it, in some sports, a lot of it is going to be judgment, but you need to track these measurables. And when you see that they are consistently high and the athlete is generally, however you measure it, generally performing well, then this all starts to come together. It just takes a while. Okay. But you have to understand something. I'm Canadian. Okay. And so a lot of the training I've done with athletes has been indoors. And so I haven't always been able to get that gold standard of measurable all the time, all throughout the year, especially in the winter, because if you're a shot and discus thrower, you can't go out in sub-zero weather and throw. Fingers can't take it. It's just too hard. You can do it in hammer. Okay. And this is a picture of some athletes of mine, 3 women. The woman in the red there was that year was ranked I think she ended up number 5 in the world as a female hammer thrower. This is on my farm when I lived in Canada. I live in downtown Chicago now. My front yard right now is smaller than that piece of concrete you see in that picture there. But this is this day was minus 34 degrees Celsius, and we threw outside. That's how much it means to us to do it. You just can't do it all the time. Okay. And so I'm just showing you this example. We can't always do it. The point is that when we can't do it, to have a second measurable to assess whether or not they're in peak condition is super, super valuable. Okay. Just on a side note, that little picture up in the corner there, that picture's from the same day. The girl in the red there, named Sultana Frizzell, she used to hold Canadian record up until about 2 years ago. Cameron Rogers broke it, but I had her doing back heaves that day. That shot put you see broke. That's an indoor shot put. I had her throwing because I didn't want to throw in a steel one, it'd be too cold. She threw it and it broke. That's a soft shell shot. That's how cold it was. It broke in half. It got so brittle. So anyways, I think that's a very cool picture. Anyways, that's how cold it was. I had a bonfire for them to keep warm and all that. Anyways, so when I was going through this that year with those women there who I was coaching, there was another woman that I coached as well. I started thinking to myself, that's when this was in 2014. And this is when the bar velocity, the bands were all starting to come out. And I started thinking to myself, what if I got one of these things and I strapped it on the bar and I just measured it? Because remember something, the weight, the workout is not changing within the cycle. It changed from cycle to cycle, but it's not changing within the cycle. So just like every day they come out and we're not changing the throwing weights and we're throwing for distance, we're measuring the distance. What if, because our weight's not changing, what if I strapped it on and I just started measuring the bar speed? Theoretically, it should do the same thing, right? We should see the same curves and like these 3 different reactions to training stimulus when it is steady state loaded. Okay. Theoretically, that should happen. And I'm going to show you some examples in a moment. But just to back up for a second here, I want to compare where I went with this with what the standard measure in BVT, bar velocity training is. Now, I don't know all that much about bar velocity training, to be honest with you. So if I get a bit of it wrong here, but I think I got the gist of it, then I apologize to those who know far more than I do. But the basic idea when you're using BVT is this: you pick a zone that you want the athlete to stay within. And I'm not saying this isn't good. I'm just saying I'm using it as to contrast the standard method and what we do. So I start looking into this and I start reading up on it, and I discover that, this is how you do this. You take this, you have a zone, and what you do is you manipulate volume and intensity. You're changing it day in and day out, depending on how the athlete's feeling or testing. I'm not exactly sure how they do it. I'm not super up on it, but the idea is to keep them in the zone from within a cycle, from week to week or day to day even. Okay. So you're changing the load based upon however you're measuring that, whether it's, you're using, you get really fancy and you're using, I don't know, what's the, Louise, what's this thing Hank Kranehoff was selling for years, or his brother was selling? Anyways, so, they'd hook you up to all these electrodes to find out what your actual status was. They had all these physiological measures. And anyways, maybe you use that and you just, okay, well, you're not in really great, you're not in perfect condition today, so we're going to ease off a little, whatever it is. You get them to stay within the zone. That's not what we're doing. But what I want to do is I got to choose a load at the beginning where that I'm going to stick with. So the choice of that load is super important. And I'm going to go over how I do that in a moment. But I'm going to choose a load I'm going to choose a zone I want to go through. And, my thoughts on strength training for throwers has changed quite a bit since I coached Dylan. I was really big into, I wouldn't say I was big into maximal strength, but when you coach a guy like that, I mean, the amount of force output that guy could put out was insane. And, he got super, super strong in the weight room. My thoughts on that have changed a bit. And where I sit now with most of my athletes on the force velocity curve is somewhere below, somewhere around strength speed to speed strength zone, somewhere in there. Although I have been monkeying around with a few other things lately, which is quite interesting. I don't know if I'll have time to get into that here, but I am going to show you some of the results from that. Anyways, pick the thing and we're going to go. The idea here is first I pick a zone that I want them to be in. I pick a load, and that load does not change, and they're going to go right through it. Okay. Now I found that was the plan. Okay. That's what I figured. Okay, this is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to treat the bar like a shot or a hammer. Okay. And rather than the distance thrown, I'm going to use bar velocity. Well, I found two things were really interesting that first jumped out at me. Number one was the reactions I was getting compared to the competitive event, so our throwing distances. So when you look at these different curves that athletes show, when they, again, you're not changing things, I found that the reactions were very, very similar. Okay. So this is real data from an athlete, a male athlete I coached back somewhere between when I started with these women and now. This is probably from about 4 or 5 years ago. This is a 9-kilo hammer. His reaction in probably the first half of it's the full cycle. I didn't take this. This guy peaked in about 30 sessions. Or just under 30 sessions. I think it was 28 or 29, something like that. Yeah, I think it's 27 here. Anyways, and this is, you can see the top line is his results in training for throwing with a 9K hammer. And the result on the bottom is a dynamic half squat. Okay. All right. I believe, I'm not sure, but I believe that is his peak velocity, not mean. And we'll talk more about that later, but it really doesn't matter much when you're tracking these things. In terms of the correlation between, I should elaborate on that. In terms of the correlation between my gold standard measurable, my throwing distance, and the bar speed, whether I'm tracking mean or peak velocity, doesn't matter all that much. It's going to follow it closely, or at least this is what I found. Here's another one from the same athlete. Okay. And you can see this one's quite similar. All right. So this really surprised me. Okay. And I think it gave some kind of affirmation to Bondarchuk system as a whole. At least, that at least the system's working right when at least your different measurables are all reacting the same way to your training. You can't always say that about traditional training methods. Okay. Tapering maybe aside. Okay. All right. Another example, this is example from the woman I'm working with now. I mentioned Nia Britt. So the 3 lines on the top are all different weights of hammers, and the line at the bottom is a step up of all things. And you can see the similarities in the curves. It's not exact, but you can see, generally speaking, where she goes down in the throwing, she's going down in the step ups. Where she's going up in the throwing, she's generally speaking going up in the step ups. I find this one quite interesting in that the curve on the step up actually mimicked the heavier hammer more, especially in the tail end, more than it did the light hammers. So I've done this with numerous different exercises. This one is really interesting because this is Nia, but this is 3 different PDSFs. So these curves are all from completely different cycles. They're all bar velocity tracking. Okay. The top one in orange is our clean pulls from the second PDSF of the season. The second one I ever did with her, actually. The yellow, dark yellow, is step ups. Okay. From the first PDSF I ever did with her. And the third one is a dynamic half squat from, I think it's the third PDSF. Third PDSF that I ever did with her. So 3 completely different exercises, 3 completely different loading schemes. Okay. The dynamic squat was sets of 5 within whatever the zone was. The sets of clean pulls was a faster speed, obviously, but I think those were sets of 2 or 3. And the step ups were sets of 8 to 10 or 12. I asked if Cody Roberts, who was her S&C, because we were doing this long distance, and her S&C guy who was working with her in Iowa, and he had taken the course. And so we were very lucky because he was unbelievably outstanding and helping me out with this. And he was doing a lot of this tracking, and he couldn't make it today, but but I think he signed up and will be watching this on the site. But you know, he was just blown away by this. We were both blown away by the reaction, and you're going to see another chart coming up. It was really quite stunning. But the point here is that look at the similarities in these curves, and the peaks in terms of the best reps are all within about, they're all like in the half squat, it's 47, 48, 47th or 48th session. In the her peak in the cleans is, I think, the 50th, and I think it's the 51st or 52nd with the step ups. Completely different cycles, completely different programs, yet she's peaking at the same time. The other thing that's interesting, which I was talking about when you're looking at these cycles, is typically athletes will have these mini peaks that are very, they're very consistent. So all of this is the point of all this is that this is repeatable. You're going to see this regardless of the exercise you're using or what else is in the program, as long as you don't change things in the middle of it, or at least if you're going to change it, you're using one of Dr. B's other methods, then you're going to be able to repeat this. That's the whole message here. But within it as well, we see that there are often little what we call mini peaks. Okay, with Katzberg, it's like Dylan says, it's like, I think day 5 is down. I mean, he'll tell you exactly, and it's like boom, it's like clockwork. He knows he's going to be down that day, so you're not going to compete on that day if you're going to compete in the middle of a cycle, right? Okay, but with Nia, it's typically around session 6 she goes up, session 9 she's down, 9 or 10. Around session 20 she has another peak, and then she plummets around 25 or early 20s or so, and then there's a steady climb from there all the way up. This I would call a number 3 reaction in Bondarchuk's reactions, even though she does climb at the beginning of strictly speaking, a number 3 reaction, they go steady at the beginning, but really they can improve, and then they drop, and then they come back up for the last 20 sessions or so, and depending on depending on the athlete. But this is quite amazing, I think, and I think when people that actually take the time to understand what we're saying here, they kind of go, whoa, like that's kind of weird, right? It's kind of intriguing, I think. So the second thing I found with this is the growth was shocking. Okay, and some of these things, like it's crazy the growth that we can typically get in this, and in a short period of time. Okay, now here's one again from Nia. This is from last year, and this particular cycle, she is the same cycle she PB'd by almost, I think, 8 meters in her first meet in the hammer throw. What you see here it's a dynamic half squat. Okay. Don't ask me what the depth is. Cody would be able to tell you. He would remember. I think it's probably 16, 17 inches, but we use one of those actual pads that I bought. It cost a freaking fortune, but just so I could get some real consistency with it. And the blue line is her best rep. Her best rep of the day, and the red line is her best set of the day, her best set average. So you can see that from where she started to her peak in both, it was about 0.35 for best rep, and exactly 0.35 meters per second growth, and for the set 0.31. So think about, and you have to remember something, if I didn't mention this earlier, when we start this, it's full intent. So that first day, she's not trying to go slow. That's balls out. We're testing her. That's a test. It's always full intent. Okay. So at full intent on day one, she's at what is she there? Like 0.57 and or maybe 0.565 and 0.64 for the best rep. 7 weeks later, she's almost at 1 meter per second. She's moving, and this was I think this was 315 pounds. So it's a fair amount of weight. I don't normally go that heavy, but I just wanted to see where this would go with her. Very low reps. It was like, I think 2 or 3 reps for this set. And it was only one set. There was warm-up sets leading up to it. And yeah, there you go. So she's moving it 7 weeks later, a foot per second faster. Think about that. She's a 180-pound woman, and she's moving 315 pounds, a foot per second faster with full intent 7 weeks later. I got to believe, I mean, you guys know better than me. I got to believe that's pretty good growth. Okay. And I think it was reflected in her throwing as well. Now, I have a guest on here that I asked to join in, and he was gracious enough to come in and sit in there. His name is Luis Mesquita. Sorry if I butchered your name, Luis. I met Luis in China, although I really wish I could go back there to my time. I spent a year in China coaching, coming in and out with Luis. He was there for a few years. And we really sort of got to know each other after we left China, but we sort of knew each other then. And I kind of wish I had taken better advantage, because Luis is one of the more brilliant S&C guys I've ever met. He took the course online, and he was, started implementing some of this with his own athletes. His success has been incredible. He's took a washed up over the hill triple jumper who had seen far better days, and took her, and using a lot of these principles, she ended up she was a world champs finalist within a year or two after that. And I think he might be able to correct me on that. It might've been Olympic final, actually. I'm not sure. But anyways, this is some data that he has used in his own training. He's 33 years old, very fit, very well trained. So this data is not coming from someone who is untrained, which you would expect a lot of growth early on. It's a very highly trained individual. And he's found this, a lot of the same here. His best in the best rep there is about 0.31 meters per second. And, you can do the math on all the other ones, but you basically see the curves. You can see the growth there. Okay. Luis has been a really good, he's been a really good colleague for me. Someone who's been really good to know, because he's given me a lot of food for thought on where to go with this. Okay. And I'm going to talk about that at the end. We're almost done here, by the way. This is how this looks. This is Luis here. So if you want a video of how this looks, this is the squat, full squat. This is what it looks at the beginning, and this is what it looks at the end. Look at the difference in movement here. And remember, this is full intent. So I don't know if you caught that, but I went through this frame by frame, and on the one on the left, his heels come off the ground a little bit. It means coming up as fast as he can. He actually leaves the ground by about at least an inch and a half in the video on the right. Okay. So it's just a sort of this is what it looks like. Okay. When it works really well. And I'm going to get Luis. Oops. I'm going to get Luis. Oh, there we are. I'm going to get Luis to pipe in here near the end here if he wants to say. Actually, Luis, you want to say anything about that right now?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for your nice words saying that I'm very fit. I don't think it's okay. I just train, but yeah, I agree with you. I've used the system as well for quite some time now, and it's not to say it's the only way to do things, of course, but I've experienced both in myself and in my athletes as well, pretty decent, very decent amount of growth when doing this. That might seem a little bit odd for most people, especially SNC people like me who have a more traditional background. But when we actually do this in a proper manner, we can see a lot of growth. So yeah, I can.
And you're those squat, you were doing that, what was your density on that? About 3 times a week, twice a week?
I was doing mostly 3 to 4 times a week. 3 to 4.
3 to 4 times a week. So yeah. I might get you to pipe back in when we get to the last slide here, when we'll have some questions. Okay. But thanks, Louis. Is there anything else you want to say about that?
No, all good, all good.
Okay, thanks. So how do I actually do it? How should this actually be done if you're going to do this with the Bondarchuk system? Okay, so I'm going to walk you through what we do on the first day, how we determine the load. Okay. So let's say we're going to do a dynamic squat, 5 reps, continuous, and it's at full intent. Okay. So the first thing I'll do is I'll have a target zone. And let's say for this, let's say it's typically within 0.70 to 0.90. Okay. And I'm going to want them to go through, I'm going to, like we saw in the other graphic, I'm going to expect them throughout the PDSF for the cycle to go right through the target zone with their measurables, with the results. So on day 1, what I do is this: I get them, I know what I'm doing for the exercise, dynamic squat, I get everything set up. I have them do 1 or 2 warm-up sets. I measure those just to make sure everything's working and see where they're at, okay, in terms of speed. And then we'll do, a real set, let's call it that. And let's, for argument's sake, say that as we do this, the athlete has done their 3rd set, first real set. Let's say it's 100 kilos. They did it 5 times, and the set average was 1.05 meters per second, and the best rep was 1.15. Well, that's way above my zone. So I'm going to say, okay, well, that looked good. So, you're all good to go. Let's, and a lot of this is eyeballing and judgment, right? I'll ask them how it felt. How did that feel? Oh yeah, it was super easy. Okay, well, let's slap 10K on and let's see where it goes. And I slap 10K on and I'm just making these numbers up. Okay. But let's say it's 110 kilos, slap, take 10K on, and now it's 0.92 meters per second with a best rep of 0.99. Okay, we're getting there. We're still outside the zone. So we do another set. And I try to keep it so there's no more than about 3 or 4 test sets, because we're going to have to do this again the next day or maybe in the afternoon. And so I gotta be a little bit careful, but depending on, I don't want 8 sets. So I'm not, but that's never really happened. It becomes pretty clear pretty quick what the load is going to be. And so I'll say, okay, let's throw another 10K on it. So now, for example, the next set might be 0.79 meters per second or a best rep of 0.82. Now we're in the zone. And I'm looking at this. I'm looking what it looks like. I'm asking them how they feel. What do you think about, how much more weight do you think they can do? And they'll say something. And so my target is to get them down below that 0.70. Okay. And maybe not every rep will be below. Certainly, I kind of want the set average to be, there might be a rep or 2 above it if we're doing 5 reps. But let's say the best rep, I'll target it 0.68, might be maybe the best rep might be 0.72, but all the other reps were below. I kind of have to guess, right? And if I'm to be perfectly honest about it, a lot of it has to do with the plates that we put on, right? Like, I want this to be fast and easy. I don't want them having to think. So I'll just look at it. Okay, well, rather than having to put a 2.5 on, let's just leave it where it is. Or, if you take all those little weights off, you put on we make it 100, whatever, make it an even plate so they can remember what the weight is. I'll do that. The point is that as long as they're below that zone, the actual weight in terms of precise load is less important. I'm really looking at something that looks, it's just, I just need it below there. Okay. If it's a little too heavy, fine. They should adapt through it. If it's I'd rather, honestly, I'd rather go a little too heavy than too light. Okay. And I'll talk about that in a second. But again, we're talking about 0.65 to 0.70 meters per second as a starting, as a bottoming out. That's not even in the maximal strength zone. Okay. So let's say we hit 130 kilos. It's where I want it. Looks good. So the protocol is going to be 1 to 2 warm-up sets, 3 sets of 5 at 130 kilos with full intent. Everything's always got to be full intent. Okay. So then that protocol, that becomes the workout. Okay. Or at least the lifting part of the workout, that one exercise anyway. And I'm going to expect them to, they're going to go right through, and I'm going to expect that in 33 sessions. Let's say we're doing 5 a week. That's going to be in about 6.5 weeks. In 6.5 weeks time, I'm going to expect them to be over 0.90, or that's the hope, or even more. Okay. And again, just to say this for the umpteenth time, remember that that protocol does not change. Okay. It's going to be the exact same thing. You come in on the 33rd session, that workout's going to be precisely the same. The only difference is you're going to see it moved a lot faster, like in the contrasting videos I just showed you of Luis. Okay. So it's that simple. That's how I do it. Okay. Before we get to some actual questions, so a few things to consider. Number one, and Luis turned me on to this, something I didn't think about. You got to watch for inhibition. So if the weight is not, like, if you get there, the growth can be so good and so fast sometimes that you'll have a weight, and if you don't want them to come off the floor, then you better make sure it's heavy enough at the beginning. Okay. But I mean, I just tell them to go, and if they come off the floor, they come off the floor. But once they start coming off the floor, that curve, if that comes early in the cycle, that curve is not going to keep going up. So a lot of times with lighter, although I'm a bit too light on the weight, because as they get, like in our example of 33 sessions, maybe around 23, 25, the speeds will start to taper off, not because they're not, well, maybe they're not adapting, but because once they've left the ground, they start slowing down. And so it affects the mean velocity. Okay. If I'm using mean as opposed to peak. So you got to watch for that. All right. And this is another thing that Luis has really had me consider is, what am I measuring? Like, what's the best measurement? Like I said, I've measured mean velocity, peak velocity, the best set, average of all the sets, average of every single rep in the workout. You name it. I've tried every single combination. Generally speaking, mean, they all work to some degree. It's really the exercise that will be closer. Olympic lifts, particularly the snatch in throwing, tends to mimic the curve closer than other exercises, although, like I showed you in that graph, all exercises do. Louise and I are talking together about some other measurables that we're looking at that we think might be interesting to measure. But once you learn how to do it, you just go on the portal and you can measure all of it. It's all there. Every time you do it, it's all there. It's just, if you're willing to put in the time of plugging all the numbers in, then you can see which ones. And I've done that. I've measured 5 or 6 different measures, different configurations in a cycle, just to see which of the curves actually mimic the throwing, the throwing distance is the closest. Okay. You got anything to say about that, Luis?
Yeah, you are absolutely right, especially in ballistic movements. So when you leave the ground, or either you jump or throw, if you use average velocity, that will include as well part of the concentric phase where you are not producing force, so when you leave the ground, and that will influence the average velocity. Of course, there is another metric which is called mean propulsive velocity, which is the part of the concentric phase where you are only accelerating, and that will diminish the error. However, I tend to use in ballistic movements peak velocity as well, because it's a little bit more, it has that factor in consideration.
Cool. So and so I'll just finish this up before we get to questions. I'll just say, so once I have all of this established, I have a backup measurable to my very specific gold standard throwing distance, right? So as practitioners that don't have that, you're working within a team sport or something like that, or a sport where you can't get that super specific measurable every day, then I would be measuring all of these things, keeping it consistent, measuring all these things. And just over time, you will learn, like when the athlete, you'll have to have some way of figuring out whether it's a questionnaire or whether it's just subjective observation, some kind of subjective analysis. I don't know. It depends on your sport. Okay. Speeds, whatever the heck it is. Then you'll have something to compare it to. But if you're changing everything day to day within the cycles, then you end up with so much noise that making those comparisons can be a little tricky. Okay. I get it. I know some people do it and they do it successfully. I just, I think there's a lot going on there that is hard to sort of filter out. Okay. So anyone have any questions? I went a little over there as I do.
We had some questions, Derek, in the chat. So let me just pop. There was one here from.
Can I stop sharing?
Yep,
sure.
Perfect. There's one here from Christian. Let me just see here. He had said, how do you determine target peak values?
Yeah, I think I went over that. Christian, did you ask that prior to me getting to those slides? Target peak values. So what I do is I went through all that, how I established the load at the beginning. Whether you're using peak or mean velocity, it'll be the same thing. Just the numbers, your zone is going to look different. Okay. Again, so I use mean. I started using mean simply. Okay, thank you. I started using mean simply because at the beginning, when I didn't know anything about this, mean was that's where I just used Brian Mann's, those Mizzou velocity sheets that he had. And I looked at it and I talked to a buddy of mine, Nick Garcia, about it, about the actual zones. And actually, when I first started, it was before I think Nick was doing that. But, I just looked it up, did the research, found out what zone, and I just played around with it. So next question.
Is there anyone else that want to pop a question into the chat? Or even jump on? And one from Baz, can you see the chat?
I can see it now. Can I answer a few questions? I see some good questions here.
Super.
This is really good question. Is it not boring for an athlete to do the same program all over again and again? Okay. This probably, as practitioners that are not, if you are not the coach, the primary coach, and you are working with someone, let's say, you are working as a consultant, or you're only doing the S&C. I don't mean, it's not diminishing your role. I'm just saying, if that's your situation, you're going to have a hard time at the beginning with this. Okay. And the reason you're going to have a hard time is because I know it looks bizarre and it's so out there that a lot of times coaches, they're just like, what the hell are you doing? Right. And I've had guys, I have a buddy of mine here in Chicago. He's actually now, I think, working for the Rangers in New York. Juan Gonzalez. And he was like, dude, is like, I'm going to lose clients if I start doing that, and he would try. And but he, you have to get over that hump. Once they see how it works, all of that disappears, because they actually look forward to it, because they're getting this metric every day, and it's simple, right? It's the same thing every day. So they're looking at the metric and they're starting to see themselves go up, and they're like, oh, it's incredibly motivating, and it gives them a lot of confidence. But it's getting them to that point that's difficult. And I know, I get it. It's not easy, but if you can do it, if you can get them there, then I think it really helps. Okay, like I think they'll be quite satisfied with it. The athletes in throws. I mean, look, the reality is about this thing is the only guy in the world that ever would have gotten away with this is Bondarchuk. Because if you didn't know who he was before you came onto this, the guy is like, he's in sports science and the coaching world, that combination, he's the Scotty Bowman of it. He's the Bill Belichick of it. His name is, people don't screw with his name. If I came along and tried to do it, Derek Evely from Podunk, small town in Canada, they all would have got laughed out of I'd get laughed out of the industry. Okay. But not him. And, and that got us through, and with a bunch of athletes that have been super successful with it. So how do you work with horizontal velocity development? Same thing. It's just a different measurable. If you're talking about speed work, it's the same thing. I mean, it's all in the course. I go through all of this in a big module on program design and micro design. It all comes down to your micro design. Because like I said, Stu McMillan has actually played with doing accelerations 10 times a week and found he did it with Dwayne Chambers and found that it actually worked quite well, right? But you're going to have to obviously manage the volumes, and you're going to have to be very SWOT in what you're working on. And I'm actually going to start coaching hurdles again this next upcoming year in high school, and I'm going to monkey around with it. So you're going to obviously have to keep, I wouldn't take a sprinter and have them do it every single day unless it was very short speed. But it all depends on the situation, right? But if we're talking about a classic sprint program where you're gonna, maybe you're gonna have three sessions. At most you're going to be able to do 3 sessions, or if you work off like a 3+1 or a 3+1 micro, you'll get 7 sessions in every 2 weeks, and I go through that in the course. So that's how you would do it. You would have to be extremely careful how you pick your distances, because those distances are all going to have to cover whatever speed qualities you want to work on. And you're going to have to remember, you're not going to be changing things for probably 3 months, 4 months. So you're going to need some acceleration, depending on where you are in your cycle, you're going to need some acceleration, some max speed runs, and then maybe some specific endurance runs. But I go through all that in the course, how to plan that out. Is there a minimum number of sessions you need to do per week for the system to work? I.e., is 1 session per week too little? Really, really good question. 1 session per week might be a bit light, right? Remember, like the choosing of that initial program and the load or programs, the choosing of those loads, not just the exercises, but what you're doing, is super important, right? If it's too heavy, then they could get hurt, or you get all the problems with overuse or overtraining. If it's too light, you're not going to get a response out of it. Okay, so doing something like that once per week, it would be interesting to see somebody try that in a squat, right? But you're going to have to, I would make it very intense, and I would make it, I would make it very intense. I wouldn't say go huge volume, but I would say don't be afraid of, it would have to be, the stimulus would have to be strong enough that it could carry them through 6 days of rest and doing the same thing for, in our example there, if it was 33 sessions, you're looking at 33 weeks before they're going to peak. Mike Chashur has tried some of this. Those of you in powerlifting that know Mike Chashur is one of the top powerlifting coaches in the world. Him and I have had a lot of discussions about this. He's done it. And as go to his website and check his stuff out if you're into that. He's got some interesting stuff, how he's adapted the Bondarchuk principles to powerlifting. So increasing velocity in the same exercises with the same weights is the factor which is giving super compensation. Yeah, I don't. I don't know if I'd word it that way. I don't know if the increase in velocity is giving super compensation, but the athlete is actually adapting to the stimulus okay. So there's a slide there. I'm not sure, boss, I think your name is, there's a slide there where we have the 3 different classic reactions that are, one is where the athlete goes steady, then goes down, then comes up. That's number 3. Number 2 is where the athlete, the curve goes down, then comes up. And that's number 2. And the number 1 is where the athlete just goes up. Those are all based upon where they start in form. Okay. And in fact, Dr. B developed a system doing studies for the Soviets in loss of form. So what happened to an athlete when they stopped training? Okay, that's how the system came about. So when you keep the stimulus the same, those reactions, those are going to be your results. Your speeds are going to come down. And the problem with it, the problem with people who can't finish the cycle, okay, like if they start it, you don't know when you start whether you're going to have a number 1, 2, or a 3. Okay. So if the athlete is a 2 and you start it, or let's say they're a 3 and you start it and they're going along and the results, maybe they're improving a little bit, but not a lot. And then all of a sudden they crash and the coach panics. Oh my God, we have to change everything. And they didn't wait long enough. And if you waited long enough, then they're going to come back up. And I guess you could call that super compensation. I tend to try not to use that word with this because it's right, but it's not, but it brings in, there's too much baggage attached to that word in terms of some of the classic, what's out there in classic training theory. So, okay. Yeah, good question though. Am I planning any more podcasts? I love them. Thank you. I am actually, I'm thinking about getting back into it. It's a long story, but yeah, thank you for that. Oh boy, it means I got to talk to Stu. All right. Hi, for an athlete starting or experimenting with the program, what's better? 1 program for faster peaks or 2 programs for strong? Oh, that's a great question. Okay. So what? Oh, Fabio. Hey, hi, Fabio. I know Fabio. Well, I'm assuming they can do 1 program every day, like a thrower, and you are a throws coach. I know that. So I would say actually 1 program. Okay. Start with 1 program because it's simple. Okay. And it's easy to make assumptions and it's easy to make correlations in transfer when you only have 1 program. So for example, and I talk about this in the course, when I'm walking into with an athlete into a major championships, okay, say it's an Olympic Games or something like that, or world champs, what I do is, and I'm preparing that last cycle, that's going to be my go-to cycle going into the games. That's the one I want to be. It's got to be the A program. It's got to be boom. I want everything in that program to have the best effect. Well, when I go to make that up like literally the week before, as I know, when I remember I showed you count back, when I know that date, that start date's coming for that cycle, I will actually print off all of the other cycles from everything else we've been doing for the year before, that season, that training season, or 2 years before, whatever I have, I'll print it off and I lay it all out on the floor. It's kind of my old school way, my lunch bucket way of doing it. I'll lay it all out on the floor and I print off the curves and I print off the program and I lay them beside each other. And I just look at like, where did we improve? And what were the best cycles? What was the most improvement? And what were we doing in those cycles? What was the program? Okay. What were the exercises? What were the weights of hammers? What were the, whatever, what was the special exercises? I didn't talk enough about special exercises. Special exercises really are the ones that drive form with the competitive event. This is a lecture on bar velocity, but really for throws coaches, it really is that number 2 exercise classification that is super important, right? And so anyway, so I will look at, and I get an idea, and then from that, I put together my best guess program going into the games. And when, and hopefully I haven't, if I have an idea of what those are way before I get there, I will, if I can, and can't always do this, because if the athlete is, if they're going to have to PB to get to the Olympic Games, and you got to do it at nationals, well, then you're going to want those exercises in that cycle going into it, right? So, and then you're going to have to get, and then you're going to have to bring some of them back in. But I will keep them out of that second to last cycle, so they get a bit of a cleansing effect. Mike Teixeira calls it they're restoring their adaptability. I will keep them out of that second to last if I know what they are before that, and so I can use them so they're fresh in that last cycle. I hope that answered the question.
I know we're running out of time, Derek. So if what I can do is we can answer all the other questions, we can let Derek know, and we can pop everyone an email. We're kind of to answer your questions if that works for you, Derek.
Sure. Yeah. Ashley, I have done it with developmental athletes in high school. It's tricky, but also easy. So anyways, you can email me and I'll let you know. All right.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time, Derek. That was super and really informative, and everything will be sent out to everyone. So you'll get the recording, and you'll get a free resource as well, and you'll also get a really nice discount code that Derek's kindly provided. So Derek, I'll leave it to you to wrap up.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Hey, is that Pete Arroyo? Is that you, Pete? It is. Hey, how are you, man? It's good to see you. We haven't talked in a while. A friend of mine from around Chicago. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Yeah, if you have any questions, you can ask me. And there's a discount code there if you're interested in taking the course. Go. All right, great. Thank you very much for showing up.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks to Output.